Elizabethtown, serving the wonderful Pennsylvania Dutch country.
In the 3 Mile Island nuclear crisis. Good evening, this is WHP News at 6:30, sponsored by Commonwealth National Bank. The reactor's fuel core appears so badly damaged it may have to be scrapped. Evacuation plans still remain ready if necessary. Pregnant women and young children are still advised to stay out of the area within 5 miles of the reactor.
Small amounts of radioactive iodine have been detected in milk samples, although he insists the levels are virtually insignificant. And he says it'll be at least a month before workers can safely enter the containment building because radioactivity inside is so high. At 3 Mile Island in Middletown, Pennsylvania, this is Jeff Otis.
This nuclear accident obviously causes all of us concern. I've directed the establishment of an independent presidential commission of experts to investigate the causes of this accident and to make recommendations on how we can improve the safety of nuclear power plants. You deserve a full accounting, and you will get it.
The 3 Mile Island nuclear plant near Middletown, Pennsylvania. 12 days ago, the reactor ran out of control, spilling dangerous radioactive waste into the atmosphere and came close to catastrophe. The implications of the accident are far-reaching. American nuclear salesmen have sold reactors like this to many countries, including France and Germany, and they're hunting for new orders in Britain. Tonight, World in Action reports from America and Britain on the future for nuclear power in the aftermath of a nuclear nightmare. Today, the United States is the world's largest energy consumer, but it relies heavily on imported oil, both for its cars and industry. 5 years ago, nuclear energy seemed to offer a supply of fuel free from foreign influence. So, in the early 1970s, the drive for nuclear power was on. It was predicted there'd be 1,000 reactors by the end of the century, providing cheap, clean power. But not everything went smoothly. Nuclear accidents have been reported from at least 5 American states. Even the reactor at 3 Mile Island, built in 1974, has had disturbing problems. Bob Pollard, a nuclear engineer, used to work for the government, checking the safety of American nuclear reactors. He resigned because he felt that the government's licensing authority, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, was more concerned with the economic strength of the nuclear companies than the safety of the industry. A top nuclear expert, Bob Pollard now works in Washington for the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Have there been previous accidents at 3 Mile Island itself?
Yes, many of the failures that have occurred since last Wednesday occurred at that plant before this accident. The very same valves stuck open. Other valves, which this time worked properly, stuck open. They have had failures of the feedwater system, which failed this time. Not always the same type, not always the same valve, not always the same pump, but multiple failures in the main cooling system, whose failure this time led to this event. And no one paid any attention. You know, all of these incidents at all these other plants should have been a warning, not to the public, but because they don't understand them, but a warning to the nuclear industry and a warning to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But no one was paying any attention. Had they been, 3 Mile Island probably would not have happened. I think the point to recognize from 3 Mile Island was, despite the existence of multiple safety systems, despite the years of design work, what happened at 3 Mile Island was multiple failures of the defense in depth, and events happened which the public had been told could never happen.
12 nights ago, a simple valve failed here, setting off a chain reaction of mechanical and human failures. Radioactive steam escaped. 2 days later, a cloud of radiation burst into the air.
The history of nuclear power has been one of ignoring warning signs because of the economic harm it would cause to the nuclear power industry, and then turning around and telling the public that the plants are safe, when there's really no basis for having said that.
Middletown, Pennsylvania, population 11,000. It's a middle-class, respectable town, a quiet backwater of American life. But last week it was thrust into the world's headlines. It's just 3 miles upstream from the leaking nuclear plant. The atmosphere in the town was tense. Police Chief George Miller.
Were you ever frightened yourself that you might have a major nuclear disaster on your hands?
The first 2 days, not really. On Friday, I started getting a little apprehensive along with the rest of the people in town. It is a frightening thing. You have a nuclear plant down there and you know basically what it's about, but you don't know what's going on.
Within 2 hours of the Friday morning leak, everyone living within a 10-mile radius of the plant was advised to stay indoors and keep their windows closed. Later that day, 23 schools in the area were shut. Pregnant women and children under 5 were advised to leave the area. An evacuation center was set up for them in the neighboring town of Hershey. 130 families stayed there. Many simply decided that the best protection of all was to abandon their property and leave town as quickly as possible.
Yes, I left on Friday morning. Friday morning when they vented quite a bit of radioactivity. I came back, I was in Harrisburg. We were having a vigil on the governor's mansion. At that time, we decided to fold up shop, came back and got my mother and left.
Where did you go?
We went to New York on Friday evening.
How far away is that?
About 200 miles the wrong direction. The wind was blowing that way.
Did you feel safer there?
We did for a while, but the idea that if something really happened, New York's a hard place to get out of.
It was also rather discouraging. I had moments that I thought maybe I would never get back to my home. I didn't take many things with me, and it's rather disruptive and kind of sad when you think, maybe I won't be going back.
By the weekend, local residents had left the area in their thousands. Over a third of the people in Middletown had gone. In nearby Goldborough, only 100 of the 600 population stayed behind. Stores closed and banks had to bring in cash from outside the area as people collected their life savings before leaving. Not surprisingly, the local market gardener in the shadow of the reactor shut up shop. And a trade in bizarre goods grew up. This store had a run on dried food rations normally stockpiled in atomic fallout shelters. Another one did a roaring trade in ammunition, guns, and, as you might expect, Geiger counters. The local police, with only 18 men, was stretched to the limits. Police Chief George Miller was worried about the number of empty houses.
On Friday, we instituted a curfew due to the fact that there was a lot of people leaving town. And the only reason for the curfew was for empty homes, to protect them from looting. This way we had a better control on the town. And men working overtime and all, we had good coverage during the hours of the curfew, which was 9 p.m. to 7 a.m.
And did it work?
Yes, it did. We had no incidents of looting at all.
Are you still keeping the curfew going at the moment?
Yes, we are. And we'll probably do that until the governor sees fit to inform the people to come back into town.
For 3 days, the plant was in a critical state. A bubble of radioactive steam threatened to cause the ultimate disaster, a meltdown. That's when the fuel core melts into the ground, releasing the reactor's contents with clouds of deadly radiation into the atmosphere.
How close did the incident at 3 Mile Island get to meltdown?
Well, first of all, I think they have had some melting of the fuel, but you're talking about a massive meltdown of the whole core. Again, the word close is not a scientific term. I can answer your question as, at the 3 Mile Island plant, we have come the closest to a massive meltdown of the reactor than we have at any previous time in our commercial reactors.
What are the consequences of a meltdown?
Here we have only theoretical studies, but even the theoretical studies are roughly consistent. You are talking about an accident that would cause thousands of deaths relatively soon. But the preponderance of death and injury would occur much later, say from 10 to 40 years after the accident. Then you're talking about tens of thousands of deaths, hundreds of thousands of cancers, thousands of genetic defects in the first generation born after the accident, and more in subsequent generations. radioactive contamination of thousands of square miles of land, and property damage of billions of dollars.
How long would the contamination last?
We started to think about this during the course of this accident when we were having trouble getting detailed information. This particular plant sits in the middle of a river. One of the major rivers in the United States dumps into the Chesapeake Bay, a major source of food supply and spawning. When you're asking how long would the danger last, you are beginning then to talk about how many years or a decade or so that river and bay would be dead for all practical purposes. You could not eat anything from the bay. You could not drink the water. It's just simply a very long time.
To soothe fears of a possible meltdown, the government mounted a public relations campaign to calm people's nerves. First, President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind visited the plant. A nuclear engineer himself, President Carter was clearly worried as he advised the town's inhabitants about evacuation.
I would like to say to the people who live around the 3 Mile Island plant that if it does become necessary, your governor, Governor Thornburg, will ask you and others in this area to take appropriate action to ensure your safety. If he does, I want to urge that these instructions be carried out calmly and exactly as they have been in the past few days.
Next, Governor Dick Thornburg, the man who advised pregnant women and young children to leave the area, set up a rumor control hotline. Anyone with a worry could ring up for help and information. He and his wife kicked off the scheme by calming a few callers.
Well, the radiation levels that are being monitored and reported now are not dangerous to normally healthy people, so I wouldn't have any great concern about that. If there's any change in the situation, we'll be reporting it to you.
Yes, it is, but it's going to be a long, slow process, and we're going to have to be very, very patient. It does not seem to be so, but the evacuation plan is in place if it's needed. Yeah, right. Well, thank you for being patient and for believing in Dick.
But at the daily press conference in Middletown, the atmosphere was different. There are still technical problems for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the body running the rescue operation at the plant. Director of Operations, Harold Denton.
We've had one more piece of equipment fail due to the radiation level since yesterday, a pressurizer level, but there are 2 other redundant level indicators and other ways of establishing the level. We're continuing to develop contingency plans for that.
Radiation levels inside the leaking reactor remain dangerously high. One of the journalists asked Harold Denton if he intended to use a robot to enter the contaminated area.
We haven't yet used Herman the robot. He's a mechanically operated robot with 2 TV cameras mounted. He can perform simple mechanical functions, has an umbilical cord of 300 or 400 feet. We hope to use him to take samples in high radiation areas and avoid unnecessary exposures to people. We thought perhaps we would have a sample taken by him, but there's another activity going on in the region and that plant, and we'll probably use him sometime later tonight.
Do you think they will learn any lessons from 3 Mile Island?
The nuclear industry won't, no, because it's money involved. They just want to go forward with nuclear power. They have so much invested in it, so many people's careers, their lifetime careers are in nuclear power. They just will refuse to budge. No matter what the evidence, they will always insist that the benefits of nuclear power outweigh the risks, no matter what happens.
Like the United States, Britain too feels the need for cheap energy. She's poured millions of pounds into a publicly owned nuclear power industry, which has itself become a formidable pressure group. Britain uses a different design of reactor to the American pressurized water reactor, the PWR, but our plants too have had their share of accidents. Dr. Michael Flood is a scientist and a consultant on energy to Friends of the Earth. We asked him about the safety of British plants.
It's not possible to say how safe they are. We're told that they're safe by the authorities. but they don't seem very willing to give us the proof. We have been calling upon the various authorities to release safety studies of the British systems, particularly the Advanced Gas-Cooled Reactor, and they won't release those safety studies. And we are particularly disturbed because the record of construction and operation of these machines is a very poor record. A lot of things have gone wrong. Only 2 of the reactors have produced any electricity, and both those have had serious breakdowns. None of them are operating at their design ratings. So we are disturbed, and we're doubly disturbed because there seems to be a conspiracy of silence. We can't get hold of the reports.
Britain's nuclear power programme comes under the Department of Energy. Secretary of State for Energy is Tony Benn.
Could an accident similar to the Harrisburg one happen here?
We have no PWRs in Britain at all, and therefore in that sense, no. But if human error was a factor, then of course this could happen in any reactor worldwide or in any very high technology installation.
Will you now examine safety precautions in Britain to see whether adjustments should be made in the light of Harrisburg?
Yes, I've already discussed the necessity of asking the generating board to go through the whole of its procedures, particularly with the human error factor, to take into consideration.
Sir John Hill is chairman of the Atomic Energy Authority, responsible for research and development.
What I would like to say is that I believe that the hazard to people around nuclear power plants is significantly less than the hazard to people living around petrol refineries, fertilizer factories, chemical factories of all sorts. And therefore, while it is perfectly right and proper for people to consider all the things that concern their environment, I don't believe that it is right for them to be as concerned about living near a nuclear power plant in this country as around many of the other industrial installations that we've got.
Britain has been almost alone in Europe in rejecting the kind of reactor that went wrong at 3 Mile Island, the light water or pressurized water reactor. On the continent, the campaign to sell the American type of reactor has had great success. Germany, France, Sweden and Holland have all bought them. In Britain, no large-scale American-type reactor has so far been built, though smaller ones are used in Polaris submarines. But there are plans to build a commercial American-type reactor here. One sponsor is the Central Electricity Generating Board, the CEGB. Robin Cook, former MP for Edinburgh Central, is an outspoken critic of the proposal.
And there is at the moment very active plans to build a light water reactor starting sometime in 1982. They're looking for a site. There'll be a public inquiry when they find that site. And I wouldn't like to be the Department of Energy or CEGB when they go to that public inquiry in the light of what's been happening in Pennsylvania.
The conditional go-ahead for the American type of reactor was given in 1978 after lengthy public debate.
Is the work upon which you are engaged?
The minister, Tony Benn, favoured the British reactor, the AGR, but a powerful pressure group urged the acceptance of the American design. In a compromise solution, 2 British reactors were ordered and design studies for 1 American reactor were allowed to proceed. Last week, Mr. Benn twice said publicly that the pressure on him to buy American had been intense. We raised this issue with Sir John Hill, chairman of the Atomic Energy Authority.
Mr. Benn said recently that the nuclear industry in this country has been exercising very considerable, and he implied undue pressure on him to buy the American type of reactor. What do you say to this?
The electricity authorities in this country have thought that it is proper for them to have experience of a reactor type which is adopted in many other countries of the world, in the same way as the airlines in this country adopt the standard airlines, standard aircraft that are used by many of the airlines around the world. And so they put to the government the proposal that they should do a study of the light water reactor, and they should put this study to the regulatory authorities in this country, so that if that is satisfactory, they should build one of these plants to get the experience that they require.
Mr. Benn himself was able to add more detail.
You've said that unprecedented political pressure was brought on you to adopt the American type of reactor. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, from the nuclear companies themselves, from very important sources in Whitehall, from the heavy newspapers in Britain, which have always been in favor of the American reactor, not the British reactor, and even the Shah of Iran made an offer that if we abandoned the British reactor, he would buy himself into the British nuclear industry and then agree to install some British-built reactors to American design.
How did he make this offer?
Well, it came to me through a source that I won't disclose, but it was a proper and official proposal made, and I turned it down flat, but it was an unprecedented development in a choice of a reactor.
Could it be described as a bribe?
Oh, no, I don't think that would be right. No, it would have been an international deal, but certainly to drop the British reactor in which we had confidence and adopt the American reactor in order to get orders in Iran was not attractive to me, and in the event of the disappearance of the Shah, which I very much welcomed, and the choice we made, I'm absolutely sure we were right.
You've spoken of unprecedented pressure. Was it undue pressure?
Oh, no, I think if you're a minister, you expect, particularly in this field, to be subjected to pressure, not only from nuclear companies, but from oil companies too. You know, I'm quite familiar with that. But this was a very sustained campaign that had gone back from the middle 60s, when the first attempt was made to get us to drop the British system. It succeeded in France, where they dropped the gas-cooled system. It failed in Britain, and it has required a great deal of very powerful effort to be made to see that we got the reactor that this country wanted, that we'd tried for 22 years and had found very satisfactory.
Do you feel able to say whether your own civil servants formed part of this pressure group?
Well, there was a very powerful body of opinion in Whitehall that favoured, a very powerful body, that favoured the abandonment of the British system and the adoption of the American system. Yes, that is the case.
Robin Cook outlines what he sees as the motivation of those involved.
There is a very powerful cabal among Whitehall in favour of going for nuclear energy. After all, if you're a permanent secretary, if you're an administrator, nuclear energy does offer you the kind of supply of energy which is convenient. It can be centralised, it can be under your direct control, it isn't diffused throughout the country. And a lot of permanent secretaries in favour of it. The Ministry of Defence are in favour of it because it helps to provide some cover for what they do in the nuclear field. The Department of Trade in favour of it because they rather mistakenly see export potential here, not that we've seen much of that in the past. The Treasury are very much in favour of it because, quite bluntly, they see it as a way of undercutting the miners. And the Department of Energy is in favour of it because, historically, research in the Department of Energy has always been about nuclear power. It's not been about anything else, it's been about nuclear power. And indeed, their chief scientist, until recently, was Deputy Chairman of the Atomic Energy Authority. Then, beyond that, of course, you have all the nationalised bodies in this field, Atomic Energy Authority itself, British Nuclear Fuels, the CEGB, all national corporations who have their own way of exerting pressure within Whitehall. And all of them seem to favour the light water reactor.
By last Friday, the people of Middletown, Pennsylvania began to drift back to their homes. Government officials have removed the immediate danger of the bubble of radioactive steam, and the reactor is currently said to be stable, though its future is in doubt. But for the people of Middletown, the events at 3 Mile Island have been a frightening experience.
Do you think the people of Middletown will ever forget the last 10 days?
No, I don't believe anybody will forget it. I mean, it's going to always be in the back of their minds, I feel.
Bob Pollard thinks that 3 Mile Island should be the end of the road for the American nuclear lobby.
The nuclear industry now seems to be arguing that because there wasn't a major nuclear disaster at 3 Mile Island, that therefore that reactor is fundamentally safe, and if you like, by implication, the whole industry. Is that correct?
I really despise people who have the knowledge to understand what happened going around saying that. There has been more damage and more events occur at that plant than the nuclear industry has ever said would happen even in a major accident. If the United States, and perhaps even the world, does not take the 3 Mile Island accident as a very cheap lesson to illustrate the hazards that we face if we continue with nuclear power, then I'm afraid the situation is hopeless.
For the British Atomic Energy Authority, Sir John Hill says 3 Mile Island would not automatically mean the end of the American reactor development in Britain.
Do you think such plans will now have to be shelved?
Not necessarily. I believe that the electricity boards will continue with their studies and will continue with the safety appraisals of this reactor type with the nuclear regulatory authorities in this country. But it's only if they're entirely satisfied with the situation of the design that they choose that they would ask government permission to go ahead.
Whichever view prevails, 3 Mile Island has left a question mark over the future of nuclear power. For advocates of nuclear power in Britain, it makes the decision of which reactor to buy for the future even more difficult. For critics, it shows beyond doubt that the claims of the nuclear industry on matters of safety must be viewed with caution.